This morning, a new warning from one of the nation's leading voices on race and democracy. In a new essay appearing in the New York Times Magazine, Nikole Hannah-Jones lays out the reality of Donald Trump's gerrymandering wars following the Supreme Court's recent ruling, which gutted protections of the Voting Rights Act. To put it plainly, the civil rights era is collapsing before our eyes. Hannah-Jones writes, quote, "Black representation may once again disappear in the South, where more than half of black Americans live. And it could be catastrophic, not just for black Americans, but for everyone." Tennessee Republicans were the first in the South to approve new gerrymandered congressional maps after the Supreme Court ruling that gutted the Voting Rights Act. That new map, which dismantles the state's only black majority district, has already been signed into law. You're looking at the scene at the Tennessee state capitol when voters protested. Democratic State Representative Justin Jones burned a paper replica of the Confederate flag with the words, "We will not go back," written onto it. But Hannah-Jones says going back is precisely what the legislature voted to do. In fact, she argues that we may now be witnessing what some historians call the second redemption. The original redemption followed the end of Reconstruction after the Civil War, when white Southern conservatives systematically dismantled black political power. They did it through racial terror, through disenfranchisement, and through gerrymandering. Black Americans in the South were effectively shut out of Congress for more than 70 years. In 1901, the last Reconstruction-era black congressman, North Carolina's George Henry White, left office. It wasn't until 1928 when the U.S. elected the next black member of Congress, but it was outside of the South. That was Oscar Stanton DePriest of Illinois. It took 71 years for the South to elect another black member of Congress when Georgia voters elected, believe it or not, Andrew Young in 1972. Donald Trump and his MAGA allies are now attempting to, again, roll back hard-fought civil rights and political representation. In South Carolina, Republicans are targeting the state's only Democratic district, represented by the civil rights legend Jim Clyburn. In Alabama, the legal fight continues as Republicans try to revert to a map that had increased black representation from one district to two, back to a map that has just one majority black out of 7 House districts. More than a quarter of the residents are black. In Georgia, lawmakers are expected to take up redistricting during a special session next month. And in Louisiana, Republicans are trying to push through a new map that would eliminate one of the 2 black majority districts in a state in which 31% of the population is black. Here's how one Louisiana voter reacted.
I have no doubt in my mind that the map's going to pass. If y'all can give us less than 0 seats, you would do it. Y'all do this under the orders of somebody that said the Civil Rights Act was harmful to white people, that it caused reverse racism. I don't have no belief in no morality on anybody that followed Donald Trump. If you wasn't with this map, you wouldn't be underneath this president. You wouldn't be in your party. You would stand up. You would stand against it. You would speak out about it.
It's not just Congress and state legislatures. It's also local school boards, county commissions, and judgeships, the institutions that literally shape everyday American life. And this is important to remember because that's what happened in the redemption. That's what happened in the Jim Crow era. It wasn't just federal law. Hannah-Jones warns black rights movements have always been democratizing movements, and history shows this country cannot deny one and maintain the other. When Redeemers stripped black Americans of their franchise and political representation, white Southerners who did not align with the Democratic Party also lost the ability to choose their leaders. These all-white conservative governments then decreased funding for public education and public services, implemented regressive tax systems that favored the elite, and helped crush labor movements. What is at stake is no less than American democracy itself, end quote. Joining me now, Nikole Hannah-Jones, award-winning reporter for the New York Times Magazine and creator of the landmark multi-platform 1619 Project. Nikole, thank you for being with us. I don't know how many ways you can say this, but I know you try and say it many times, and that is the incompleteness of the inclusion of women and black people into American democracy meant that we were not a complete democracy, largely until the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and 1965.
Yes. I mean, I think part of the reason why we really struggle to realize the stakes is because we haven't been honest about how recently we've had democracy in America. You can't have democracy if democracy means one person, one vote, if more than half of your population can't exercise it. And so we have always, as this country, really struggled, often violently, to realize true democracy, interracial democracy, democracy that encompasses men and women. And that has always been violently contested. And so if we mark democracy at all citizens having all citizens having access to the franchise, then we have to mark that at 1965. And in fact, the Voting Rights Act is considered the crown jewel of the Civil Rights Acts, the most successful of the Civil Rights Acts. And so to see what's happening now means holding democracy is going to be very challenging. And as you noted in your opening, we're seeing, I mean, within hours of the Supreme Court's ruling, a rush of white Southern legislatures to just change the voting maps, sometimes when elections were already in process. So that shows us what was holding them back was the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah, so there are a few things at play here. There are local elections. So in the South, you've got these systems of runoff elections, which were literally designed to keep black people from winning office. You've got systems of gerrymandering that mean that a state like North Carolina, which might vote for a Democratic governor or a Democratic attorney general, has a supermajority of Republicans in the legislature. What we are learning is redistricting and a lot of these laws are coming in at the local and state level, which is effectively more disenfranchising than things that are going on at the federal level.
Absolutely. So we often kind of mark the success of the Voting Rights Act by looking at Congress and congressional representation. But the true success of the Voting Rights Act happened with who was able to become a county judge, who was able to become a state judge, who was able to serve on their city council, who was able to serve on their school board. So black people, after the Voting Rights Act, they also sued to end kind of countywide and citywide electoral systems that ensured black people couldn't get elected because it is very, very rare in the South. In fact, it's very, very rare in most parts of the country for white majorities to send black people into elected bodies. So, for instance, Governor Landry said, basically he defies the notion that white people in Louisiana will not elect a black candidate. And yet they have never sent a black person, to Congress. And so it's not just about whether or not at the federal level we have representation, which frankly is not the most important representation. The most important are your local and state elected positions, because that really shapes people's lives. And so we could also see an evisceration of the ability for black and brown and frankly, white progressives, white people who want democratic policies to be able to elect people of their choice. And this is what I really need people to understand, because I'm seeing, Ali, the framing being about, well, why should black people have a special carve out? In a liberal democracy, you have to have the ability to protect minority rights and to ensure minorities also have to say in their government.
And it's wild because when you see the representation that's being cut in some of these states, I mean, literally black people are a quarter or a third of the population and they're getting 1/8 or 1/9, in some cases, nothing, no guaranteed representation. In South Carolina, a Republican, the head of the Senate there, said this could backfire. They wanted to, I think it's 6-1 and they wanted to make it 7-0 Republican. And he said you might actually end up with 5-2 because you're going to activate a base of people who say this is just crooked politics.
That's exactly right. I think maybe some legislators across the South have been surprised by the pushback. I think they've been used to kind of silence when they are focusing on civil rights, and that is not what's happening right now. Black people take their right to vote very seriously. There's an understanding of all of the death, all of the violence that was borne by Black Americans to gain democracy. There's an understanding that the vote is the right that protects every other right. If you don't have access to the ballot, you can't secure any other right. And so I think they may have miscalculated in thinking that not just Black folks, but people who actually care about democracy of all races all across this country were just going to lay down for this. I don't think that that's going to happen. As you know, the NAACP and other groups have called for Black athletes to boycott the SEC schools. I think we are going to see a very serious pushback because the number of deaths that led to the passage of this law, many Black people see this as disrespectful to our ancestors. And in fact, disrespectful to some people who are still with us, like Andrew Young.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's see how this goes. Thank you for your analysis, as always. Nikole Hannah-Jones is a reporter for the New York Times Magazine and the creator of the 1619 Project.